Hello viewers and welcome to another commentated match of Warhammer 40,000 Conquest. My name is Mitch and I am the Hive Tyrant. Today I am pleased to present you with a very special game indeed. This is going to be my Week 1 League match from War Master Sam Mann's Black Crusade Online Conquest LCG Competitive League. This is going to be the very first game of Conquest LCG I've played since the 2015 World Championship weekend, which took place November 4th, 2015, and this is going to be the very first time that I've ever piloted our most recent to be released Astra Militarum faction warlord, Broderick Worr. My opponent in this video is Aussie Jedi, a gentleman named Jonathan Palermo. He primarily deals with the Star Wars living card game. He's host of a podcast called Ion Control, so I definitely recommend you check out his work, and since we're going to be in for a bit of a long haul in this game, I'll just go ahead and say that during the previous online Conquest LCG competitive season in Sam Mann's WA League, I ended up taking 6th place out of an entire 56 or so entrants, but I definitely consider myself a far more competent player nowadays. I definitely don't play much Conquest LCG. I certainly opt to make videos instead. I've only played, as a result, about 20 or so matches prior to recording this game, but nevertheless, I'll definitely give it a good shot, and I believe that I'm a much more formidable player than I was during the previous season. So in the Black Crusade, there are about 100 or so entrants. This is my very first game, but let's see how I do. Like I mentioned, this is the very first time that I've ever played Broderick Worr. In assessing my opening hand, I did not take a mulligan. What I was looking for is about 4 or so different plays that I can make during my opening deploy turn. Because I don't have very much experience actually playing Conquest LCG myself, my dear friend Travis McDaniel actually supplied me with this Broderick Worr deck. In a previous video, he piloted a slightly different iteration of this design, but I enjoy it quite a lot just from looking at it. But in my opening hand here, I decided to keep this because I have a very strong economy presence. I've got the Tallarn Raiders and the Void Pirate as 1-drops, 1 command icon associated with those, so that I can kind of spread my command presence equally throughout the tabletop. I've got that Sanctioned Psyker, which I'm holding on to as long as possible so that I can deploy that over the top of an enemy 1 command icon unit, just so I can get the utmost value out of that. And then I've got some hard hitters. Anxious Infantry Platoon is absolutely fantastic in Broderick Worr. It's a 3/3 with a command icon for 2. It's very hard to go wrong with a unit like that, and especially in my opening hand here, you can clearly see that I've got a copy of my signature support, the Forward Barracks. That's definitely a very powerful card, and I wasn't sure if I should play that the first turn or not, but that was definitely something that encouraged me to keep my opening hand, just because in a battle of attrition, that is enormously powerful, and especially in the context of having a Steel Legion Chimera in my hand, which itself is great for prolonging combats. It basically acts like a magnet for enemy firepower. I was very happy with that little combo here, but my gentleman, my opponent in this video, Aussie Jedi Jonathan, he's a little bit less practiced, less familiar with Conquest LCG than I am, so as a result, he took a little bit of time to take his turns, so this may not be the most action-packed video, but I nevertheless feel as though it was definitely worth publishing, and more than anything else, if you notice any critique, any commentary, any suggestions for how I can improve my gameplay, please let me know in the comments, because I definitely do not consider myself a good player. I consider myself to have reasonable potential. I've got a lot of familiarity with our card pool. During the previous season, my opponent in this video is Ragnar, and I ended up taking Ragnar to 6th place during the Octagon WA, so Let me know what I could have done differently, what I've done suboptimally, and how I could improve. But currently, my opponent has a Tallarn Raider to planet number 1. I've got my own at planet number 2. I put out a Void Pirate at planet number 3, and assessing our opening lineup of planets, planets number 2, 3, and 5 are going to be my identified victory condition. Those are all green planets, so any of my Astra Militarum faction units positioned at those locations are going to be getting a +1 attack value bonus thanks to Broderick Worr, and I figured that planet number 1, note, my opponent Ragnar has placed a combat unit on that planet. I was kind of conflicted between should I try to deny him that card bonus, because it is a 2-card bonus planet, or should I just let him potentially, put multiple units on that planet, let him capture it, and then just really focus on planets 2, 3, and 5, and that way I can kind of get the utmost value out of all of my units. In retrospect, I think I've already made a little bit of a suboptimal play here. I wanted to put that Void Pirate at planet number 3 as opposed to planet number 5, just because I didn't want to make a big juicy target for Ragnar. I figured that if Ragnar were to go to planet 5 and kill off my Void Pirate and deny me that card bonus and get that resource bonus and steal one of my resources, that was all just way too appealing for him. So I'm not sure if it was the right play or not, but I'm ultimately going to be putting an Anxious Infantry platoon at planet number 5. I figured if that was the case, I would not be sending Broderick Worr to planet 5. I could just have that unit sit there essentially indefinitely, and if Ragnar tries to show up at that planet to kill off that unit, there's a reasonable likelihood that outside of having a crushing blow or something like that to help him out, if I draw multiple shield cards, I could potentially deal out, a 4 attack value swing to Ragnar, and then as soon as I have that forward barracks on the board, so long as I can at least, if he shows up to a planet, attempts to snipe me, fails, I take a swing back, whether or not I hurt his Warlord, whether he's got Indomitable, whatever it happens to be. If a combat round concludes, I could generate a Guardsman token, and then from that point on, it essentially becomes impossible to overcome that. At the end of a combat round, you generate a modified 2/2 Guardsman token, just because Ragnar by himself, without Eager Recruit, without Drop Pod Assault, isn't really going to be able to crack my defenses there. But note that primarily I'm just focusing on stretching out my command icon-laden units. My opponent ended up putting another unit to planet number 1, so he's got 2 cards and 4 resources all invested in a planet that I'm very okay with letting pass me by. So at this point, I've definitely resigned myself to I'm not going to be sending my Warlord to planet number 1. I'm thinking that he might end up sending Ragnar to planet number 2, and as a result of that, I'm not exactly sure if I should send Broderick to planet 2 so I can try to get that card bonus locked down, so I can try to ensure that I will be able to force a random card discard from my opponent, but I definitely want to deprive this Space Marine player of cards, and really the only other consideration I've got here is my opponent has a copy of Iron Guard Recruits situated at planet number 4, and I'm trying to think it would be great if I could send Broderick to planet 4, shut down that card and resource bonus, earn that for myself, kill off his Iron Guard Recruits, because as soon as Broderick shows up, he's not going to be able to retreat with that unit. It would end up destroyed instead, and an Iron Guard Recruits isn't going to be able to benefit from the same, crushing blow and Indomitable type interactions. And then if I were to put a forward barracks into play again, then I could start kind of distributing Guardsman tokens along the board here. Note that my opponent at present only has 1 total resource, so I'm not tremendously concerned about veteran brother Maxos's ability during this game, but I'm definitely going to be inclined to dodge planet number 1, and at this point I was trying to think, do I want to do the forward barracks play? I think I go a little bit conservative, so I opt for forward barracks as opposed to Sanction Psyker or Iron Guard Recruits at planet number 4, and let me know in the comments section if you feel that was a suboptimal play. I could have put out a combat unit a command unit at Planet 4 just to make sure that he doesn't get that card or resource. But then if that was the case, perhaps Ragnar would have shown up to Planet 4, potentially tried to, kill my Psyker or whatever, and then have Aatrox Prime blow up my Void Pirate. I believe what I did here, my rationale for putting that forward barracks into play, was that if I send Broderick to Planet 2, I can basically ensure that I'll be able to get that random card discard without fear of, if Ragnar shows up at that planet, he could potentially kill my Tallarn Raiders, and then he'd slug it out with Broderick. I would end up taking too much damage or be forced to retreat from that planet, and that would completely suck. And I figured that the forward barracks would give me enough leverage where even if Ragnar has, say, eager recruits, something like that, I can still keep on that pressure. But regardless, Ragnar shows up at planet number 1, which I feel from my opponent is a suboptimal play, just because he wouldn't really see a victory condition until planet number 4. Clearly, I don't have anything that I can do to resist his presence there at planet 1. Note that my opponent ended up reeling in 3 cards and 1 resources. I'd have loved to see that being a much lower number, but I did let him basically take Elowith there, and for me instead, I did end up doing more favorably economically in regard to pulling 3 cards and 3 resources for myself. So I snagged a couple 2 shield icon cards. My opponent ends up capturing Elowith, and there was a little bit of confusion in regard to how to look at the top of your deck, how to put cards at the bottom of your deck, just because, again, my opponent Jonathan in this match is far more familiar with the Star Wars living card game. Myself, I've only ever played a demo of that game, and I really didn't care for it, but that was several years ago, and I'm sure it's a much better game now. But, of course, Ragnar is going to end up winning that first planet entirely uncontested. I'm going to end up successfully managing to win a battle at Barlas, so I can basically guarantee that random card discard. And kind of one of my biggest faults last season is that I went into each and every match with a very low level of confidence in myself. I had not yet felt any kind of despair. It was kind of odd being on Skype with an opponent that wasn't tremendously familiar with the Octagon interface, who hadn't played in a while, but definitely I had a healthy amount of respect for Ragnar from the previous season. So, I didn't have my mind made up one way or the other where this was going to be a crushing loss or an easy win. So I kind of went into this with just a more open mind, and even though my opponent has 2 resources, so definitely a drop pod assault red flag right there, he's got 7 cards. I'd yet to give in to despair, because I knew that going into the HQ phase of the following round, he's only going to have 6 resources, and even though the most powerful Space Marine units are generally around the 3 cost range, even with 2 of those, I felt reasonably good. Looking at my hand, I've got still 3 2-command icon units for 2, so I was pretty comfortable with being able to, like if my opponent were to dump out Rogue Traders, Void Pirates onto the board, I'd be able to trump those pretty nicely. He'd waste cards and resources investing in those units. I'd be able to shut off their card or resource bonuses and end up winning that planet. And now I was starting to feel pretty decent, because even though Veteran Brother Maxos can be a little bit frightening, particularly in a Captain Cato Sicarius deck, he isn't nearly so threatening alongside Ragnar, especially considering my opponent only has, a couple of resources in hand. The Tallarn Raiders are a 0-2, Veteran Brother Maxos is a 2-3, so himself, he'll be showing up to a planet. Those units will be showing up exhausted, and now Ragnar's movement is a little bit more confined. So my opponent does have 1 blue technology icon, but again, I guess another huge difference relative to the first season is even during my final match when I was playing against Corvus, who ended up winning, I felt like I had to try to win as quickly as possible, just because I saw myself as a relatively poor player. I figured that the quicker the game would go, perhaps I'd have fewer opportunities to screw up and make mistakes. But in this game, just from very early on, I kind of identified my victory condition and just decided to go with it. and in this case it's going to be I'll focus on planet number 4, so I'm very much playing the long game like that anxious infantry platoon. Even though it's a very powerful combat unit, note that I felt totally comfortable playing it further down the line, just because I know full well that if that's the planet that I'm going to win the game at, that's going to definitely help me out as a very powerful unit. We have our first HQ phase come and go, so note, I'm now the player with initiative. We both acquire 4 resources, draw a couple of cards off the top of our decks. I ended up coming across another copy of Steel Legion Chimera, as well as an Anxious Infantry Platoon, copy number 2. So I felt like those 2 copies of the Emperor's Warrant, it's a very powerful card. I feel like it's a pretty undervalued card. If at any point I could ever convince Ragnar to part from his forces, that would have been a spectacular ability to use. You know, it's an event, you exhaust one unit, it deals its attack damage to another. Blood Angel's veterans could be exhausted, it could kill an Honored Librarian under the absolutely ideal circumstance, but considering Ragnar is kind of a little bit of a first planet bully warlord, I definitely wasn't expecting to get anything more out of it than shields, but I put that Steel Legion Chimera out to planet number 1, and again, because I was fortunate enough to stumble upon my copy of the signature support forward barracks in my opening hand, I very much kind of resigned myself to playing a draw out combat, draw out the game as much as possible play style. So for instance, putting that Steel Legion Chimera at planet number 1, I want to win at Barlas, of course, because it's the random card discard planet. I want to continue to create that value disparity between my opponent and I, but at the same time, the Steel Legion Chimera means that it itself will have to be a priority target. Like my Talon Raiders is able to attack for 3, but if you attack it, you shave off a point of damage, and then if I shield as well, I could potentially shave off 3 points of damage, and each and every combat round I'll be generating another Guardsman token, so I'm kind of approaching the game with a mindset at this point where I want to try to, at any green planet especially, think, how can I ensure that combat is going to hit the end of a combat round at least once? Because free 2/2 units is absolutely incredible, and even though I've yet to benefit from the forward barracks yet, it is one hell of a card effect. So at present, I'm trying to decide, again, is it going to be safe to have Broderick Worr show up to planet number 3? Where might my opponent go? Yavahn, planet number 2, is a very low value destination. It's possible that my opponent could show up at planet 3 just to try to trigger Aatrox Prime or something. There's not going to be a battle taking place at that planet otherwise. Iridial, I thought, was our current 5th planet. It would be a total waste of time for Ragnar to go there, but again, I was thinking that if Ragnar shows up to planet number 4, my Anxious Infantry Platoon is going to be okay. The forward barracks is going to be able to help me out there. I've got that copy of the Emperor's Warrant, and I ended up putting a copy of Steel Legion Chimera at planet number 2 because I was concerned that Ragnar would be showing up at that planet. So if he shows up, if both of his units are exhausted, if I make sure that Broderick does not show up at planet number 2, Ragnar swings, the Steel Legion Chimera can take a couple points of damage, or I can use a shield card to prevent that entirely. Then we hit the end of a combat round, and then I generate a Guardsman token, and then I can keep using shield cards to ensure that we stay in combat as long as possible. I was actually pretty pleased that my opponent used Iron Halo, because that's kind of a control card. Frostfang is kind of a swing for the fences type card in regard to your 1 relic slot. So whereas that might allow him to output more damage, if he's going to be playing a longer game, I'm totally okay with that, and considering he had to invest 3 resources in that attachment, I'm also very okay with him not putting command icons out onto the board. So it's currently my opponent's opportunity to play. He's got 3 resources. Once again, I'm trying to decide, how do I want to spend my final couple of resources here. He ends up putting a Blackmane Sentinel into play, and he positions that at planet number 2. And I thought that was kind of an unusual choice. because what I was thinking is you could easily put, like, at this point, I'm assuming Ragnar is going to be showing up at Planet 2. I figure a Blackmane Sentinel could arrive at Planet 5 and win you a card, like if you were to deploy that unit to Planet number 5, and then if you need... like, my opponent basically ran out of plays before I did, presuming he didn't have anything to use his last command icon, or his last resource on. But I figured that you could put the Blackmane Sentinel out someplace to either shut down one of my card or resource bonuses, like Planet 4, shut off Ossus 4 for me, and then if you decide that you need to move your Blackmane Sentinel based on the movement of my Warlord, then it might be a better idea to move the Blackmane Sentinel to that location. But regardless, the Blackmane Sentinel play kind of definitely convinced me that Ragnar's presumably going to be showing up to Planet number 2, and therefore, as a result, I decided that I wanted to play my Anxious Infantry platoon at Planet number 2 just because I wanted some sort of heavy hitter here. My opponent put a Void Pirate on Planet number 2, and that kind of made me question as to whether or not Ragnar was going to that destination or whether that was simply a suboptimal play. For instance, note that I've got 3 command icons, but, you know, color me unsurprised that what we did eventually end up seeing is a copy of Promotion here onto the relocatable Blackmane Sentinel. So definitely wasn't surprised to see my opponent do that 4 command icon play, but now I was a little bit perplexed in regard to what a desirable destination would be for Ragnar. Like, I feel confident with Planet number 1, I feel confident with Planet number 2. I'm thinking that at this point I can play a little bit of a longer game. I can just send my Warlord to Planet number 3, I can ensure that those Iron Guard recruits are killed, and even in a worst case situation, if I lose a battle at Planet number 2, presuming Ragnar did show up at that planet, I'd be able to use Aatrox Prime to at least blast that planet and deal a little bit of damage out to those Space Marine units. Turns out I had guessed correctly, so I send Broderick to Planet number 3. He's nice and safe from Space Marine units. Note that my opponent at this point has no resources. I myself have no resources, but I didn't feel the necessity to try to save resources for an Emperor's Warrant just because I figured, you know, Ragnar's going to be showing up wherever combat is going to take place. So my opponent did choose Planet number 2 as his destination. So Veteran Brother Maxos and that Talaran Raiders are going to be showing up exhausted. Ragnar himself is going to be an incredibly difficult to destroy target. He's a 2/7 Warlord with that Iron Halo, so he's going to be able to shrug off damage like nobody's business. And this is going to be a great opportunity for me, in my mind, to try to convince my opponent to play some long battle of attrition here. So I'm feeling pretty confident in those shield cards I've got in hand. During the command phase, note, Broderick Worr was able to conveniently shut down the opposition from winning at Planet number 3, and I was able to win command at Planets 1 and 2, and unfortunately I wasn't able to get my Void Pirate bonus at Planet 2, but my opponent's promotion was basically wasted in piling so many units on that planet, so I think a much better idea in hindsight for the opposition here would have been if Ragnar was going to be winning at Planet number 2, command-wise, because he's showing up and winning automatically. Maybe my opponent thought that Broderick Worr was going to be arriving at Planet 2, but I think the Void Pirate at Iridial would have been great, just because you'd have gotten an additional card for yourself. So my opponent has 1 resource, I've got 3, he's got 6 cards, I've got 8 cards. Something I'm quite worried about is an eager recruit, because namely he's got 1 resource, and then of course 1 resource is also the threshold that would allow my opponent to use Indomitable. So something I'm keeping in the back of my mind here is the potential for my opponent to use Crushing Blows in regard to my shielding. I ended up winning Barlas. That's going to be my first green strongpoint icon. And I'm currently waiting, I believe, for my opponent to do a random card discard. So during the previous round, his random discard was, I believe, a copy of Promotion, which I wasn't too terribly enthused to see. And again, just because my opponent is so much more familiar with the Star Wars living card game, just kind of walking him through the Octagon interface here. But we're going to be seeing a battle break out at our current Planet number 2. Oh, I apologize. I missed it earlier. Steel Legion Chimera is what my opponent discarded. So he's kind of running a slightly unconventional Ragnar deck. He's got that copy of Veteran Brother Maxos. He's got Steel Legion Chimeras. So he's kind of it's almost a Ragnar torn between two different worlds. Like, Ragnar kind of favors a little bit faster playstyle generally, but Steel Legion Chimera are generally a somewhat slower card, and for a 3-cost slot, I'd be much more inclined to run a Space Marine faction unit. They've certainly got some incredible 3-drops, Honored Librarian, Blood Angels Veterans, nowadays the Lone Wolf, and then they've also got the White Scars Biker, and Steel Legion Chimera cannot be put into play through Drop Pod Assault, whereas any of those aforementioned SM units can be. So, Ragnar's going to show up at planet number 2. He, of course, has the initiative token. It's going to be his opportunity to take a swing first. Interesting choice on behalf of my opponent is that the Blackmane Sentinel is at risk of being killed far more easily than is Ragnar, so I believe it's slightly suboptimal for him to be attacking with Ragnar right off the bat. Note, there's not really too many tricks that I can do. Ragnar is going to take a swing at, I believe it's going to be my Steel Legion Chimera. Yes, it is. I encourage my opponent to use octagon arrows in just a moment, and my thought behind discarding the summary execution was that I don't need it necessarily to fuel my victory condition. Like, planet number 1 is just a green icon, planet 2 is a tricon, and planet 4 is just one green icon, so it wouldn't really help me too much to win capture, say, Aatrox Prime or Iridial. So I throw that away. I figure that if Ragnar only deals me 1 point of damage, unless he had 3 crushing blows in hand, he wouldn't be able to kill off my unit, and I definitely want to save my 2 shield value cards until they're just absolutely necessary. So I use my Anxious Infantry platoon to swing for 4 at that Blackmane Sentinel, just because if I could kill it off, that would be absolutely fantastic. Unfortunately, my opponent discards his signature attachment Frostfangs. That saves the Blackmane Sentinel, and I was wanting to not attack with my Steel Legion Chimera. Like, in a perfect world, it would have been the optimal play to use the 3 attack value unit to kill off the Blackmane Sentinel, but I just watched a match between 2 very competent players in which they used a little bit of overkill just to minimize the amount of damage that they were taking under any and all circumstances possible. So I figured the Anxious Infantry platoon, if my opponent didn't have an Indomitable in hand, he'd have had to be holding on to his 3 shield icon card in order to save the life of the Blackmane Sentinel, and had he not been able to save it, then I would not have taken another swing. But the Blackmane Sentinel did get an attack off on me. Again, I just used a copy of Promotion to block that damage. I did not want to use a 2 shield value card, just because unless my opponent were holding on to 2 copies of Crushing Blow, a statistical unlikelihood he'd not be able to use that. So let me know in the comments if you think that this was a suboptimal play. What I did with my Steel Legion Chimera is I killed off the Blackmane Sentinel. It was threatening just as much outgoing damage as Veteran Brother Maxos was, but I wanted to go for the guaranteed kill as opposed to being slightly risky. Like, ideally, it would have been better value to trade that Steel Legion Chimera's attack for killing Veteran Brother Maxos, but even a single 1 shield value card would have prevented Maxos from being killed, and by my ability to kill off that Blackmane Sentinel, again, that's another couple fewer points of damage I can guarantee myself being able to take. We come to the end of a combat round here after our Void Pirates ineffectually exchange blows with one another, and I generate my first Guardsman token of the game, so that's going to be a 2/2 token. Then all of our units ready, and then we have the opportunity to retreat. So, none of my units, except for my Void Pirate, are going to be able to retreat from our current planet. I felt fine having my Void Pirate sit at that planet. I didn't feel as though I really needed to retreat with it, just because I was pretty confident in my ability to win a battle of attrition, considering that my forward barracks is starting to process units. And I didn't want to retreat with my Void Pirate just because I felt reasonably secure in knowing that if I can have it sit at that planet ready the following round, it'll contribute a command icon. So check this out. My opponent swings with Talarn Raider at my Steel Legion Chimera, and now I decide to use a copy of the Emperor's Warrant. So at that point, 2 attack, -2 is going to be no damage whatsoever. I know that my Steel Legion Chimera is going to be a priority target, but in attempting to kill off my opponent's units, again, I could see the logic behind Steel Legion Chimera attacks for 3, kills Veteran Brother Maxos, but in attacking with my 4 value unit, even though it's a less desirable target, if my opponent had not been holding on to its 2 shield value card like that, he would not have been able to spare its life, and then it would have been another one of his dead units, and it would have made it all the more likely that I'd have won. So, let me know in the comments section what your thoughts are on how I'm processing the mathematics of combat here. So Veteran Brother Maxos takes 2 points of damage. He's still barely alive, and it's going to be my opponent's opportunity to take a swing, and then I've got to decide on kind of my turn. Do I want to have my Steel Legion Chimera live, or has it kind of done its duty here? My opponent still has 1 resource, so at any point a Steel Legion Chimera could kind of, hop into play and ruin the mathematics of combat, but I kind of felt as though that probably would have happened in any case. So another something I wasn't entirely sure about is I used a copy of the Emperor's Warrant again to preserve the life of my Steel Legion Chimera, and I feel like I probably could have gotten away with not doing it, but I didn't want to take any unnecessary risks. I definitely tried to wring as much value as possible out of each and every one of my cards, but I just felt like it was playing it a little bit safe, and if I could keep my, Chimera in play, if I could convince maybe Ragnar to try and kill off that unit as opposed to my ready Guardsman token, then I felt as though it was worth keeping around. So again, I just was pretty concerned and wanted to make sure that I did not lose this battle under any circumstance possible, just because I want to be able to deal out a lot of damage, kill off all these SM units, because if I can break my opponent's back upon this planet, he's only got 1 resource and 2 cards, and I've got a much better board presence than he does, so the longer I can convince him to hang around, the more damage I can deal out, the better it's all going to go for me in the long term. But my opponent ends up discarding a copy of Primal Howl as shields. It preserves that Tallarn Raiders. I went for the Tallarn Raiders as opposed to Veteran Brother Maxos, just because Indomitable cannot target a non-Space Marine faction unit, so I was unable to successfully kill off that unit, but again, I'm just trying to deprive my opponent of as much attack value as is possible. Ragnar finally takes a swing, decides to stick around at the planet, does successfully kill off my Steel Legion Chimera, and then I have a Guardsman token deal out the killing blow, finally finish off that copy of Tallarn Raiders, and again, I'm feeling pretty secure that at this point, if my opponent decides to retreat with his Warlord, that's fine. If he retreats with Veteran Brother Maxos, I'll be winning that battle at Aatrox Prime, so I can blast his HQ, and really just in assessing this match, it's incredible how differently I view games. I'm so much more able to process a lot of different variables at once, as opposed to just really, having blinders up or something like that. But we come to the end of yet another combat round. That's going to be an additional Guardsman token generated, so that's going to be another 2/2 token sitting upon this planet. It's going to be my opponent's decision whether or not he wants to retreat first, and at this point I'm starting to feel very comfortable in knowing there's absolutely nothing that my opponent can do. Even if he can manage to kill off 2 of my units or plays an eager recruit and kills off 3 of my units, I'll still be able to generate additional Guardsman tokens, and all of his things are getting pretty fragile here. Veteran Brother Maxos is down to 1 hit point. Note that I'm out of shield cards, but he takes a swing with Maxos. That's kind of the correct order of operations there, attacking with your Warlord units first. So unfortunately, he does kill off a ready copy of my Guardsman. And here I'm kind of torn in between what I want to attack with and who I want to attack. I'm not exactly sure what the correct thing to do is in this situation. I want to kill off his army unit, but at the same time, I want to threaten his Warlord, and I know that there's going to be that I guess in hindsight, it doesn't really matter too much. I could have had my Guardsman token attack, or I could have had the Anxious Infantry platoon attack, but my token takes a swing, kills off Veteran Brother Maxos. I know that I want to attack with my token first, just because Ragnar could potentially kill it off prior to its opportunity to attack, so Ragnar deals a couple points of damage to my Anxious Infantry platoon. To my good fortune, he does not have a copy of Crushing Blow. My platoon takes a swing. I'm threatening 4 total points of damage upon Ragnar, and my opponent, of course, uses his copy of Iron Halo to entirely mitigate that, well, I guess entirely circumvent that damage, so just blocks it entirely. And once again, our Void Pirates exchange blows, do a little bit of a song and dance routine there, and that's going to bring us to the end of another combat round. My forward barracks is going to generate the 3rd Guardsman token for this round, and that's just absolutely been fantastic. I invested a card and 2 resources in something that's generated me 3 2/2 units thus far, so it's going to be up to Ragnar. Does he want to retreat? I'm unable to retreat with any of my units apart from that Void Pirate, and it looks as though Ragnar wants to stay and at the very least try to kill off that Anxious Infantry platoon, so it definitely sucks seeing that go, but now this is going to be a fantastic opportunity for me to try to deal out a little bit of damage onto Ragnar Blackmane. So because I was situated at a green planet, not only could my Anxious Infantry platoons not have the option of retreating, but I also don't have to pay their forced reaction where at the end of a combat round you have to retreat them unless you pay 1 resource. So even though I had a few resources, I didn't have to stomach that unappealing ability of theirs, and thanks to both of my Guardsman tokens, I've managed to deal out 4 points of damage to Ragnar. Note, Iridial is on the board, but whether it's a good thing or not, it's just not really a factor in my mind. I'm just focused on my victory condition, and if I can harass Ragnar, then that's fine, but whether or not I bloody that Warlord is basically irrelevant, so I'm not taking any unnecessary risks, I'm not doing anything stupid. I'm just kind of playing a longer, slower game and going for that longer victory. So that's another combat round come to a close. That's a 4th Guardsman token being generated, so I've now got 3 2/2s sitting at that planet. My opponent has his Void Pirate. My opponent also has Ragnar, and he does finally decide to retreat with Ragnar, so it's entirely pointless at this point for him to continue fighting at this planet. And from here on out, I'm feeling pretty good about my odds of winning. Broderick is going to be able to kill the Iron Guard recruits there no matter what happens. I suppose worst case scenario is my opponent does that Eagle Recruit play, puts that into play, but then again, Broderick would be able to kill that off as well, and my opposition only has 1 resource and 2 cards relative to my 3 resources and 4 cards and my far stronger board presence. So I managed to win at Yvarn. I do not trigger that battle ability, much to my opponent's stated chagrin. We were both on Skype, kind of talking things out as this match was ongoing. Broderick Worr takes a swing. I wasn't sure if my opponent would use a shield card or not, just to get a little bit of damage dealt out onto my Warlord, but he does not decide it's worth it. If he even has a shield card, I don't know. So I kill off his unit, and then Aatrox Prime is going to allow me the opportunity to trigger it, because my opponent has no actions, and that's going to be a sterling opportunity to threaten a 5th point of damage on Ragnar, which is just 1 hit point remaining on that enemy Warlord there, and then also I threaten to kill off the enemy Void Pirate unless we happen to see a shield used. So that's 1 point of damage assigned to both of those units, and my opponent allows that to resolve. Broderick Worr is going to bounce back to my HQ, but just because I caught a little bit of a slip-up in order of operations here, because all my units are exhausted at that planet, we come to the end of a combat round, I generate a Guardsman token, then I have the opportunity to retreat. I, of course, don't. Then I have a combat turn. Then I win that battle. So that was kind of a little bit out of the order, but, my opponent and I were kind of talking things out on Skype. I was a little bit distracted in this match, just trying to help walk him through the digital automation process. So he was totally cool with that. He and I both kind of did a couple, take-backs over the course of the game, but We have another HQ in the process of going on. Planet number 5 is now Planum, the Move, a non-Warlord unit planet. It's cool to see another green, strongpoint type icon planet on the board, but it's pretty much irrelevant. My opponent now has the initiative token in assessing the cards in hand. I've kind of run out of combat units, but again, I'm kind of focused on what exactly can I do to prolong combats. My opponent only had 5 total resources. He throws that Blackmane Sentinel out to planet number 5, and that kind of convinced me with what I'm going to be doing. So I do certainly have a range of 2 command icon units to put at planet number 5. Something I could have considered doing is prior to playing that Void Pirate, I could have played a 2 command icon unit out to that planet, but I was thinking what I want to do is, because I've got so many more resources than my opponent, even if he has another copy of Promotion in hand, I was thinking if I could get him to pass before me, then I could wait, hang on to all my 2 command icon units, and then throw those out to the 5th planet so that I could nicely shut off that 1 card and 1 resource bonus afforded to him by that planet. But my opponent puts a support into his HQ. Again, that's not really doing anything for him economically. It's perfectly fine. Catachan Outpost really only helps to kill off one of my units harder, and because I've got that forward barracks, if you can only eliminate 1 unit at a time, then that's definitely not looking to work out well for you, and already my opponent's down to 1 resource and 2 cards, and would you look at that, I've got a Sanctioned Psyker at planet number 5, trumping his Blackmane Sentinel. He does have a promotion. I kind of ran out of actions. I wasn't able to do quite what I wanted to, but I kind of forgot in my mind that I guess I'm stranding my units at this planet. Like, if Ragnar were to show up there, he could potentially kill off those units. My Sanctioned Psyker and Iron Guard recruits aren't going to be able to retreat, but they would be a 1-4 and a 2-2 respectively. And at this point, I'm thinking wherever Ragnar happens to go, do I want to try to manipulate shield cards just so I can force combat rounds to occur? Like, I was thinking if I could end up being so sneaky as to, like, if Ragnar were to show up at planet number 4, for instance, I was thinking Ragnar could take a swing. Maybe it would be worth it so I could use that preemptive barrage to make sure that my Void Pirate is saved. Then we come to the end of a combat round, then I generate a Guardsman token, then I start whittling away at Ragnar here. But in throwing my Void Pirate out to planet number 4, granted that's the healing planet, Ragnar's going to strip 5 damage off of himself, but I really can't be bothered at this point. Like, I just don't care. If my opponent's Warlord heals, it's irrelevant to my winning the game, whether or not his Warlord is bloodied. So I send Broderick Worr to planet number 3. I did that because I felt very secure in knowing that planet number 1 was going to be 1. In hindsight, I did make a mistake here. I forgot I have a Guardsman token sitting at planet number 2, but a Guardsman token by itself is not going to be able to win a card and resource, so in hindsight, I'd have played my copy of Iron Guard recruits to planet number 2 just so I could get that card and resource. So, a little bit of a mistake there. I forgot that Guardsman tokens, of course, don't have command icons. Not that I really ever play Conquest LCG, but I did happen to overlook that, so that was a mistake that as soon as I committed it, I felt very stupid about it. But in regard to command, my opponent shows up at planet number 4. Ragnar ends up winning 1 card for himself. He shuts down my card bonus, but I did end up getting in 2 cards and 4 resources, so doing far better than my opponent is economically. He's got his Blackmane Sentinel basically stranded there at planet number 5, so I felt good about shutting that down. Planet number 1, I quite handily win. I didn't feel any concern at all that Ragnar would be showing up, and it's a bit of a shame. I was trying to think, when we get to that combat at planet number 4, if I'd have drawn an additional 2 shield value card, then I'd have considered using that to spare my Void Pirate. I'd have generated another Guardsman token, then Ragnar could have attacked again, and then I could have kind of kept the momentum of combat going. Like, I could have kept generating 1 token per round, but he's got that Catachan Outpost, which could definitely throw a wrench in my plans. Because I won at planet number 1, that puts me at 2 green strongpoint icons, and I wanted to drop off Broderick Worr at planet 3. just because that's my victory condition planet, and if I can ensure that the Steel Legion Chimera and the Tallarn Raiders are going to be ready sitting at that planet, then that helps fuel my victory condition very nicely. And at this point, I'm kind of thinking that even though it's not going to be the first planet, if my opponent happens to have a copy of Exterminatus, he's, quite welcome to blow up whatever I've got, and from this point on, I'm just kind of thinking that during the following round, I can send Broderick again to my victory condition planet, whether or not my opponent blows up all of my units thanks to Exterminatus, and then from this point onward, I can just start saving units basically in hand until it comes down to that's the first planet, and I no longer need to worry about Exterminatus killing off all my stuff, and then I can just kind of keep nicely distributing a command presence throughout the board here. But at planet number 4, thanks to the Catachan outpost, Ragnar swings for 4, and there's absolutely no silly shenanigans I can try to do with my Void Pirates, so that's no opportunity for me to screw around or do anything cute. Iridial pulls damage off of Ragnar, but again, I'm not too tremendously concerned. I know that thanks to my forward barracks, I'm going to be able to win a battle of attrition, so I was feeling very good about that. We come to another HQ phase here, so that's going to be 4 resources accumulated, 2 cards acquired for both players. Our new first planet is going to be Atrox Prime, and I definitely don't necessarily want to make the same mistake of not winning command at that planet, but I'm trying to think in my mind, where is it most appealing for Ragnar to show up? I ended up coming across my copy of the signature attachment, the Commissarial Bolt Pistol. I've got 10 resources at this point relative to my opponent's 4. I've got 6 cards relative to his 4. I played that bolt pistol first just so I could kind of conceal my hand in regard to where I'm going to be distributing command icons. My subsequent play is looking to be the Catachan outpost just because I want to prevent my opponent from being able to capitalize from having a bunch of information in regard to distributing units. Like if I were to put a copy of Tallarn Raiders out to planet number 3 as my first action, he could use that opportunity to dump like an Iron Guard recruits or something onto the table, whereas if I'm acting second or third, whatever, if my opponent passes, then I just know exactly what he's playing. So I've got that bolt pistol in play. I'm just trying to think in my hand. I can do that outpost. My opponent puts an Honored Librarian into play at planet number 1, and this is something that made me feel pretty good about you generally don't put an Honored Librarian at a planet unless you're going to back it up, so I'm thinking if my opponent doesn't play another unit, he's probably going to be sending Ragnar to planet number 1. Granted, planet number 1 is Atrox Prime, all of my units are going to get blasted, but it's only going to be one time, and I'm still thinking that I want to send Broderick Worr to planet number 2, just to set up all those units to potentially win the game for me, because even if all those Guardsman tokens, even if all of those units take 1 point of damage, that's not going to kill any of them off necessarily. If I want, I can shield my Void Pirate, but if I don't need to, then I don't have to. The Space Marine player generally doesn't have much in regard to area effect units. I've not seen any Tactical Squad Cardenas yet. It's entirely possible that my opponent might end up using something along those lines, but I'm not too tremendously concerned. I've had that copy of Preemptive Barrage in hand for quite a while now, and my opponent is running at such a dearth of resources. I'm doing so much better than he is in regard to command. Between the cost required to put Tactical Squad Cardenases into play and to be able to fund Indomitable and, maybe having shield cards in hand, I'm just starting to feel like I've got a lot of possible answers to different problems should they end up cropping up. So I send my Warlord to planet number 2. I've got that Void Pirate there. My opponent, as I presumed he would, shows up at planet number 1, so I didn't bother putting any command icons or units, just basically sent out to die at planet number 1. Note that even though it costs 2 resources, I've got more resources than I do cards, especially considering this is a very low unit, value deck. Well, high unit count, low cost deck, very low cost curve. I do that Sanctioned Psyker at planet 3 just so I can reel in an additional card. So, in regard to command, my opponent is going to win 1 card, 1 resource. That's fine. It's totally okay if he gets something, but then I do quite well in regard to our remaining 3 planets, plus I have a Void Pirate present. So it looks like, Planet 2 is going to be a couple of resources and a card for me. Planet 3 is going to be a card. Planet 4 is going to be a card and a resource. He does not decide to relocate his Blackmane Sentinel, which is quite wise. He'll definitely need that for the following round. So I ended up getting a total of 3 cards and 3 resources relative to my opponent's 1 card, 1 resource. So at this point, I've got 9 resources in total. I've got 7 cards. I've got an Elysian Assault Team. I've got Summary Execution, which I'm fine just intending to use that as shields as opposed to suppressive fire. I've got quite a bit of disaster insurance in my hand. Elysian Assault Team is going to be great. Even if one of my soldier trait units dies, I can replace that with an assault team. I can use that preemptive barrage to kill off whatever units he shows up, should I feel as though it's necessary to do so. And then suppressive fire is going to be a great opportunity to kind of shut down any enemy card effects that are problematic, like one big Honored Librarian I could turn off, or anything along those lines. So at planet number 1, Ragnar actually, again, slightly, I guess maybe it's not suboptimal, but whether it is or not, Ragnar is the one that takes that swing, kills off that Guardsman token. I'm not going to be able to withstand the attack of an Honored Librarian. He's got that Iron Halo, so that was another opportunity, perhaps, that I could have done something cute to try to force Ragnar away from that planet, but I felt as though it was just kind of unnecessary, and why take a stupid risk? Like, I could have maybe done something silly, use suppressive fire to have the Guardsman token knock out the Honored Librarian, preemptive barrage blocks Ragnar's attack, but Ketachin Outpost would have resulted in it dying. I could have done an Elysian Assault Team, generated a Guardsman token, then I could have dealt a little bit of damage, but the Iron Halo would have been a thing, so it just seemed like it was much easier to just keep my eye on the goal, disregard anything silly at the first planet, let his Honored Librarian show up during the following round, and then kill it off once it's going to be exhausted, and easy pickings. But Aatrox Prime clearly fires. I end up discarding Summary Execution, which is going to be kind of sort of useless. So I discard that just to make sure that my Void Pirate is going to stay alive. That's going to be an additional card for me. I'm intending to send Broderick Worr to planet number 1 this following round, because that's my victory condition. I know that my opponent is presumably also going to be sending his unit there to, or his Warlord to planet number 1. And now I've got that copy of Rattling Deadeye in my hand. I've got a copy of Rockcrete Bunker. So I've got 14 resources in total and 8 cards relative to my opponent's 5 resources and 6 cards. Things are still looking pretty good for me to be winning a whole hell of a lot of command, presuming my opponent sends his Warlord Ragnar to planet number 1. He'll shift away that Blackmane Sentinel. That's going to be 3 additional command icons for him. But now, since planet number 1 is going to be the first planet, I need not worry at all about Exterminatus potentially killing off any of my dudes, so I can start just filling the board with units. Really, the only thing I'm worried about now is that an area effect unit could be slightly problematic, but I do happen to have that copy of Preemptive Barrage. I've got Suppressive Fire, and my opponent only has so many resources, so I suppose the worst case scenario might be a copy or 2 of Tactical Squad Cardenas and multiple copies of Indomitable, but my opponent only has so many resources, and even if that worst case scenario happens, I may end up with just enough powerful units to be able to tilt the scales and end up winning. So I must confess, I had a moment where I quite nearly shit my pants when my opponent played a copy of Daring Assault Squad out to planet number 1. This is a very unconventional Ragnar deck I think that he's playing, and I certainly was not expecting to see a Daring Assault Squad. But what is a very easy counter to that unit? Why? Of course, it's the copy of Suppressive Fire that I've got in my hand. But again, I'm not wanting to give anything away. My opponent now only has 1 resource, so I play a copy of Rockcrete Bunker as opposed to any kind of units. My opponent still has 5 cards in hand, but I'm feeling very confident about winning command at each and every planet during this presumably final game round. And even if I were to lose at this planet, my opponent would not be able to win, and therefore I could potentially pick up a victory at Planet 2. So here's what I'm kind of thinking. My opponent puts a Rogue Trader at planet number 1. I do a Rattling Deadeye, which is going to potentially, thanks to my Catachan Outpost, be a means of killing off that copy of the Daring Assault Squad, even without bothering to use Preemptive Barrage. And now I'm starting to think my opponent doesn't have any resources. He's not going to be able to play Indomitable. The best thing he has in hand could be 2 shield value cards. So the Rattling Deadeye plus Catachan Outpost is going to be able to attack for 4. If he uses a 2 shield value card, it still takes 2 points of damage, and then my Anxious Infantry Platoon, thanks to say Preemptive Barrage, could potentially kill it in a single shot, or I could save the Preemptive Barrage for shields. So I dump out all my remaining Tallarn Raiders onto the board. Those are going to be able to attack for 3 thanks to Broderick Worr. Obviously, I indicate that I'm going to end up sending my Warlord to the first planet. Looks as though my opponent is having a little bit of difficulty flipping over his command dial, but no big deal. Like I said, the hotkeys for Star Wars LCG are quite a bit different than Conquest LCG, and definitely kudos to Aussie Jedi, to Jonathan, for, being in a Conquest LCG tournament when your primary game is a different living card game. So I'm going to end up winning command at all 3 of our planets. Note that Ragnar does not remember to trigger his effect, but I end up being a little bit of a good guy and later on allowing him to trigger that ability. It would have been a great opportunity for my opponent to kill Rattling Deadeye through Ragnar's reaction, since he ends up being commit to the same planet as is Broderick Worr, but I could have used Preemptive Barrage as disaster insurance and given some of my other units ranged. So just keep in mind that I certainly have a lot of different answers to whatever it is that my opponent is going to do in this final battle here, despite missing that reaction. So I think my opponent felt pretty bad about missing that, but I did let him, take care of it, and really through any number of different effects, I would have been able to remove that Daring Assault Squad, which is, believe me, my priority target. So I've got the ranged skirmish ability, even though my opponent has the initiative token and is Warlord present. Catachan Outpost is going to augment my Rattling Deadeye, and I'm going to use this opportunity to attack for 4 directed toward my opponent's Daring Assault Squad. He currently has 4 cards in hand, and let's see if my opponent is going to use the opportunity here to shield. I can't quite remember if he does or not, but in regard to combat tricks, he's got no resources. Indomitable is not an option. Eager Recruit and Drop Pod Assault are similarly not an option for my opponent, and I really have no idea what he could have in hand. He could have another Iron Halo, he could have some Nocturne Ultima Storm Bolters just as additional 3-value shield cards, but need I say it again, I was just feeling very good about the volume of units I have sitting upon this planet, and even if Broderick ends up being bloodied by like that Honored Librarian or something like that, I've got so many units here at this planet, I can only imagine that there's going to be multiple combat rounds going on, and that forward barracks is definitely going to be putting in work. So I think at this point, my opponent and I might be discussing that missed reaction window where he felt really silly about making the mistake not killing off my Rattling Deadeye with Daring Assault Squad, because I guess he didn't have any 2 shield value cards in hand. My Rattling Deadeye is able to quite conveniently kill off his Daring Assault Squads. That's going to be a card and 4 resources of unit, all killed thanks to that 1-cost Rattling Deadeye, though it certainly did derive benefit from the Catachan Outpost, and just something certainly for me to remember during following games here is that Rockcrete Bunker essentially goes unforgotten in regard to whether or not I want to be shielding things. So we are beyond the ranged skirmish round. I certainly could decide to use Preemptive Barrage, but I feel as though, because really all I can do is deal out some damage to Ragnar, He's got that Iron Halo. The Honored Librarian can't really be targeted. I'm thinking at this point I just want to hold on to Preemptive Barrage as shields, because, as we're seeing now, even though the arrows aren't indicating it, my opponent says that he's going to use Catachan Outpost on Ragnar to attack for 4, directed toward my Warlord, and I only end up... again, we're on Skype, and this is another little mistake of mine. 4 minus 2 is going to be 2 points of damage. Note that I fail to activate my Rockcrete Bunker, and I only notice until a little bit later that my Steel Legion Chimera, of course, is going to shave off 1 point of damage dealt out to Broderick Worr as well. So, much like I allow my opponent to use... Okay, so my mistake. Here's what happened. So we were talking about the Ragnar Blackmane reaction, and he felt stupid for not killing off the Rattling Deadeye with Ragnar, so what I did is I just discarded the Preemptive Barrage to essentially keep the game state intact. Ragnar would have tried to kill the Rattling Deadeye and failed. Then Ragnar swings for 4 at Broderick Worr. I discard a Suppressive Fire as a shield so that that's only 3 points of damage. Then I fail to use Rockcrete Bunker and the Steel Legion Chimera because at this point we're quite involved in combat, over Skype, talking things out and kind of making sure that the fidelity of the game state or whatever is as pristine and intact as possible. So there I get the Steel Legion Chimera pulling 1 point of damage off of Broderick Worr, but of course I completely forgot about that copy of Rockcrete Bunker sitting in my HQ forgotten. I have a copy of Anxious Infantry Platoon take a swing to kill off that copy of Blackmane Sentinel just so I can guarantee that it is killed. I don't believe that my opponent has a 2 shield value card, so perhaps that was slightly suboptimal, but I nevertheless did want to ensure that that was killed, and it really doesn't matter too much what I do at this point, but, you know, that's not really a good excuse. I guess I should have taken the death of that Daring Assault Squad to indicate my opponent did not have any 2 shield value cards in hand, and therefore I should have attacked with a Talon Raider as opposed to the Anxious Infantry Platoon, but I was also thinking that the platoon might be a priority target for my opponent. But regardless, now all of my opponent's units are exhausted, he's out of resources, and now I know there's not really going to be any tricks to expect, and there we go, that's going to be a copy of Indomitable discarded as shields. So my Iron Guard recruits, again, I want to try to stack as much damage as possible onto the Warlord prior to his using that Iron Halo, so I swing for 2, we see Indomitable discarded as shields, that's only going to be 1 point of damage. Guardsman token swings for 2, we see Iron Halo block that, another Guardsman token swings for 2, that's going to be 3 points of damage on Ragnar. A third Guardsman token is going to take a swing, that's going to be an additional 2 points of damage on Ragnar, and now I'm left with 4 3-attack value units. I'm going to go ahead and take a swing with my Steel Legion Chimera, and that is potentially going to be an indeed bloodied Ragnar Blackmane. So Ragnar is going to be sent packing away from that planet. Note, I've not had any units leave play, I don't think, so I've not been able to benefit from the Commissarial Bolt Pistol, and I suppose, come to think of it, it would have been kind of funny had the Daring Assault Squad been able to trigger, and then I'd have just been able to, trigger like 8 or 9 different blasts thanks to the Commissarial Bolt Pistol, but I have a Talon Raiders take a swing, it handily kills off that copy of the Void Pirate, then I have an additional copy of Talon Raiders take a swing, I end up killing off the enemy Honored Librarian, and at this point, I end up winning the battle. My last remaining Talon Raiders, my Broderick Worr, my Void Pirate, are readily able to take combat turns, so at this point there are no remaining enemy units, my opponent has run out of actions, and that is going to be the game, so GG, great game, very well played by my opponent, so I ended up winning my first week's match of the Black Crusade. It was definitely a little bit heartening to have an early game victory under my belt. Like I mentioned, during the last league, I really never played Conquest LCG more than at most 1 time per week. The only reason I entered the Black Crusade is because Warmaster Sam Mann, my Tyrant Cast co-host, is well, my co-host. I didn't want to upset my friend by not joining it, so even though it's much more work to do these commentated self games, I nevertheless feel as though it's an interesting bit of content to put out. I definitely request that you leave a comment letting me know what you'd have done differently, what you think I've maybe changed as a player, because just looking back to the very final match of the last season's game, it's just incredible how much more relaxed and how many more variables I'm taking into account here. So again, thank you so much to Jonathan Palermo for allowing me to record this match. Be sure to check out the Star Wars LCG podcast Ion Control. He's a host, Aussie Jedi on Card Game DB, so very much a stand-up gentleman. But once again, thank you very much for watching. It was great to get in my first match of Conquest LCG in practically 10 weeks. So, as always, if you enjoyed this content, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel if you've not done so already, or if you are already subscribed, as ever, you're always encouraged to share this content, because the more engagement these videos receive, the more likely it becomes that people will stumble upon this game. They'll give Conquest a try, they'll like what they see, they'll give it a shot, they'll enjoy what they experience, they might join our LCG community, and of course, all together we continue to send the message to Fantasy Flight Games, telling them to continue to support this fantastic product. If at any point you'd like to get in touch with me, I would encourage you to do so through Facebook or on Twitter, and if you ever feel so inclined to help support the Hive Tyrant, I would be honored and humbled were you to make a contribution or donation to my Patreon. Even as little as $1 a month definitely helps cover my file hosting and operating expenses, and all of that funding is going to be reinvested in this channel to pay for file hosting, subscription expenses, swath of different operating expenses, and who knows, I could end up attending Worlds 2016, Gen Con 2016, or even reinvest in an HD camera and record more live-action games of my own, actually develop a little bit of a local meta for the first time in my life, and all of it goes into making this channel great. So I've had some new patrons as of late. I'm hugely appreciative to each and every one of you. So once again, I think that's enough of my prattling on for one day, but thank you so much for watching, and as always, be sure to check back in again soon for much more Conquest LCG content to come.